at Imperial College Business School. He's also the head of analytics, marketing, and operation department at the same business school. His research is on decision-making on uncertainty, more on theories and applications. And then regarding the application, he also has a variety of applications in supply chain, healthcare, and energy. And today he's going to talk about randomized assortment optimization. So without further ado, I would like to give the mic and the control of the screen to Wolfram.
Thanks a lot, Reza, for the kind words. And thanks, Yannis and Reza, for giving me the opportunity to talk here. It's great to see that we have the seminar series working again, and it's great to see so many people here. Let me see. I hope you can see my slides.
Yes, perfect.
Great. So as Reza was already saying, I'm going to talk about an application of robust optimization today. It's going to be an application in assortment optimization, which is in itself an area in revenue management. And this work has been led by a PhD student, Zhengchao Wang, as well as Heike Peurer, my colleague, and me. All right, let me start with a very stylized example just to set the scene. Imagine we have a universe of 3 products, those 3 phones shown here. By the way, can you see my mouse?
Yes.
Oh, that's awesome. And we are now given the task to find an assortment out of exactly 2 of these 3 phones so as to maximize expected profits, where the expectation is taken with respect to the uncertain behavior of our customers. So let's assume that our customers behave according to the following choice model. We have 2 groups of customers of equal size. The customers of group 1 have preferences going from left to right. So you see if the phone here on the left is shown in our assortment, the customers of group 1 will buy it for sure. If that phone is not part of our assortment, since we need to show exactly 2 phones, the customers will buy that phone. That's group 1. Whereas group 2 has diametrically opposite preferences going from right to left. And this is indicated here by the probabilities, they consider an outside option. So for example, if the phone on the right is not available, a customer of group 2 has a 25% chance of leaving the store and buying a phone somewhere else. Now in this setup, there are exactly 3 assortments that we can consider, because we are tasked to build an assortment of exactly 2 products. So the first assortment would contain the first 2 products, and it would lead to expected profits of £5.25. The second assortment would contain the first and the last product, leading to expected profits of £2. And the optimal assortment, in view of our profit maximization objective, would be the assortment that contains products 2 and 3. With expected profits of £5.50. Let's see whether we understand where those £5.50 come from. Imagine a customer of group 1. That person is looking for this phone, but this phone is not part of the assortment. So that person would buy the phone in the middle, leading to £10 profits, multiplied by a probability of 1/2, leads to £5 expected profits. And likewise, if we look at a customer from group 2, they will buy for sure this phone here, which has a profit of 1, again multiplied with a probability of 1/2, leads to 50 pence of expected profits. Together we get indeed the £5.50 expected profits. So in other words, this here would be the optimal assortment in our stylized problem. Now, assortment optimization problems of this form have been studied intensively over the last 20 years. This is just a very small summary of the literature that is most closely related to what we're going to talk about today. Broadly speaking, in the literature, people have studied different choice models, and they have studied the structure of optimal assortments under different choice models, as well as how to efficiently compute optimal assortments, either without any side constraints or constraints such as the cardinality constraint that we have imposed in our example. So this is a very well-studied field. And the focus of my talk today will be on estimation errors. Choice models, such as the one that we have imposed here, they don't fall from the sky. They need to be estimated from data. And data is inevitably scarce in reality. So if we estimate this choice model from limited data, we normally incur an estimation error. So let's assume in our example that we got the group proportions wrong in our estimation. Instead of a 50-50 split between the two groups, it could, for example, be that in reality, only 25% of our customers are from group 1 and 75% are from group 2. In that case, the nominally optimal assortment of products 2 and 3 has its expected revenues, sorry, its expected profits dropping from £5.50 to £3.25. So in other words, the optimal nominal assortment is very brittle in the face of estimation errors. Sorry. Now, an area that has studied the issue of estimation errors in detail is machine learning. And one of the key concepts of machine learning is the so-called bias variance trade-off. What that means in our context is that whenever we face the task of estimating a choice model, we have, in some sense, two extremes that we can choose from, or that we try to trade off. And that is either erring on the side of simplicity, such as, so basically what I mean by that is we can choose a choice model that is easy to estimate, that has few parameters to estimate, but that is probably overly simplistic, that is not able to capture all the intricacies of our customer behavior. In that case, we would say that choice model suffers from bias or underfitting. On the other hand, what we can do is we can use more complex choice models, such as the Markov chain or the preference ranking choice models. I will explain them later on. Those are choice models that are characterized by a large number of parameters. So they are much more difficult to estimate in practice, but due to their complexity, they're able to capture more realistic customer behavior. In machine learning, we would say those models suffer from variance because they're hard to estimate. Alternative notions here are underfitting for the simple choice models and overfitting for these more complicated choice models. It turns out that actually when we combine estimation with optimization, the situation gets in some sense worse. And that is, even if we are able to get an unbiased estimate of the choice model of our customer's behavior, if we plug this unbiased estimate into an optimization model, we typically end up with an assortment that is optimistically biased. So we end up with an estimate of the expected profits that is too large. And that leads to post-decision disappointment. And that has also been studied in finance under the name error maximization effect of optimization. So how can we address this issue of post-decision disappointment? One solution that is often employed in machine learning is, in this bias variance trade-off, to err on the side of complexity. We use more complicated choice models, such as the Markov chain or the preference ranking models. But then subsequently, we penalize complexity in model output. So what we do is we allow for a complicated model, but if the estimation problem actually makes use of that complexity, that gets penalized through a regularizer. A popular example is least squares regression, where we would use a lasso regularizer to penalize the number of non-zero slopes in our solution. Now, the concept of regularization is quite specific to machine learning, but it turns out it has a natural generalization to optimization problems as well. And that is studied under robust optimization. One can show that robust optimization applied to estimation problems often leads to a formulation that is equivalent to the regularizers that people use in machine learning. So how does robust optimization work in the context of our assortment optimization problem? Instead of employing the classical paradigm of first estimating the parameters of our choice model and then subsequently finding the optimal nominal assortment for this point estimate, what robust optimization does, it first estimates an entire uncertainty set of plausible parameter vector values. We call this the uncertainty set. You can think of this as a statistical confidence region, for example. And then robust optimization plays a game between the decision maker and nature, a Stackelberg leader-follower game, where the decision maker chooses an assortment that performs best in view of the worst parameter values in the uncertainty set. So let's have a look at what robust optimization would do in our stylized example. Let's assume in our robust optimization model, we correctly anticipate that the uncertain group proportions vary between 25 and 75%, and of course that they add up to 100%. In that case, we have already seen that the expected profits of the optimal nominal assortment drop from £5.50 to £3.25. The assortment containing the first and the last product have now its expected profits drop from £2 to £1.50. And the new robust optimal assortment is now the assortment containing the first two products. It originally, under the 50-50 group proportions, had expected profits of £5.25, and now it has worst case expected profits of £4.13. Now, we are certainly not the first ones who propose to use robust optimization in the context of assortment optimization. Over the last 10 to 12 years, it has been studied quite intensively already. But what we are trying to investigate in this talk here is whether we can do more in the context of a robust optimization problem, in the context of a robust assortment optimization problem. And here's my proposal. Imagine a customer comes to our store. At that moment, we randomly flip a coin. If the coin shows head, we show the customer the robust optimal assortment. And if the coin shows tail, we quickly change our assortment to the nominally optimal assortment. It turns out if we do so, we end up with higher worst case expected profits of £4.81. Compare this to the robust optimal, the deterministic robust optimal worst case expected profits of £4.13 earlier. In fact, if we tune the probability weights, we can increase these worst case expected profits to £5.33, which is very close to the nominally optimal expected profits of £5.50. So let me summarize this example. What we've seen so far is that in the face of estimation errors, if we implement the nominally optimal assortment, we have expected profits under the nominal parameter setting of £5.50, but they drop by more than 40% to £3.25 if we consider estimation errors. We can recover about 15% of these revenue losses or profit losses by going over to a deterministic robust optimization problem. But at least in this example, we can capture another 20% of lost profits if we go over to a randomized strategy. And in this case, we end up with a randomized assortment strategy that only loses 3% of profits when we go over from the expected case or the nominal case to the worst possible case over the uncertainty set that we have chosen. How does that work? Why does that work? Let me try to give you 3 explanations of why randomization actually helps in this context. The first one is a mathematical interpretation. We can think of our deterministic assortment optimization problem as a discrete optimization problem where we have, in this case, exactly 3 possible assortments, and we evaluate them in view of the worst case expected revenues. Alternatively, however, we can see these 3 assortments as extreme points of a probability simplex of randomized assortment strategies. In this case, we don't just have to choose between the extreme points, but we can choose any strategy in between those extreme points. Now let's have a look at the worst case expected profits of those strategies in between. To make the visualization simple, let's assume there are only 2 possible scenarios, namely the group proportions 25%, 75%, and 75%, 25%. Under the first scenario, Sorry, somehow my slide stopped. There we go. Under the first scenario, we end up with expected profits that are shown as this blue hyperplane here. So in other words, under the scenario where 25% of our customers are from group 1, we have profits, some profits for this assortment, and this assortment. And in between, if we randomize between these assortments, the expected profits of that scenario are going to be affine in our randomization weights. And similarly, we have a different hyperplane for the expected profits under the second scenario. And now what nature does is, whichever randomization strategy we choose, they will choose the worst of those two scenarios, which is basically the pointwise minimum of those two hyperplanes. And we can see that the pointwise minimum of those two hyperplanes give us a concave function that we want to maximize, because we want to maximize the worst case expected profits. And maximizing a concave function typically leads to an optimal solution that is not an extreme point of the feasible region. So in other words, typically, the optimal solution here will not be one of the deterministic assortment strategies. So that's my first explanation of why randomization helps. Let's look at a second explanation. This is, in my view, perhaps the most intuitive one. It's a game theoretic interpretation, and it works like this. Sorry, there are sometimes gaps. My PDF viewer seems to be on strike today. When we implement a deterministic robust strategy, as I mentioned before, we can see this as a Stuckelberg leader-follower game, us against nature, where we decide on an assortment, and subsequently nature chooses the worst possible parameter settings for this assortment. On the other hand, if we play a randomized assortment strategy, then we're not choosing a single assortment, but we're randomizing between various assortments. And now nature is no longer allowed to choose the worst possible parameter setting for each assortment, because there is going to be one true customer choice model. So in other words, nature has to commit itself to one single parameter setting, and that is going to be inevitably some kind of compromise parameter setting as far as nature is concerned. It's going to be one that is bad for us on average in some sense, but not the worst possible one for each assortment. And that's why we can gain from randomization in that context. The third interpretation, finally, is a managerial one, and that is that we can think of randomization as a diversification strategy, as basically not putting all our eggs into one basket. And the financial literature teaches us for a long time that this tends to be a good idea. All right, so I want to try to address 4 key questions in my talk. The first one is to better understand when randomization can help us to improve these robust expected profits, the worst case expected profits in the assortment optimization problem. The second one is whether those in-sample improvements, so the improvement in worst case expected profits, actually translate to improved expected profits on withheld test data. In my view, this is often the gold standard in practice. A decision maker may not care that much about our worst case objective, but rather a decision maker may care about how well does the assortment that we come up with perform on new data that is generated under the same choice model, but the choice model that we only have been able to inaccurately estimate. That's my second question. The third question is, how can we compute optimal randomized assortments? And finally, how can we actually implement them in practice? Let me actually start with the last question. How can we implement assortments in practice? How can we implement randomized assortments in practice? Probably the most straightforward setting for this is an e-commerce setting. Imagine an e-commerce platform such as Amazon. If you search for a product, let's say a hairdryer, then Amazon actually faces an assortment optimization problem, because Amazon probably has hundreds of different hairdryers that they are selling, but they need to decide which 25 hairdryers to show you on the first results page. And that's an important choice because there's lots of There's lots of evidence that customers might look through the first page and then maybe the second page, but if they haven't found a suitable product after the second page, they will just leave the store and go somewhere else. So it's important to get the right products on the first 1 or 2 results pages. And there's nothing that prevents Amazon from showing you different results than me. In fact, Amazon already does that in practice. So in other words, Amazon has a very easy way to randomize assortments between different customers, just show different customers different results pages. And this experience can be made consistent by cookies, meaning if you search for a hairdryer in the morning and then you do it again in the evening, Amazon recognizes that you're the same user, and as a result, they will show you similar results pages. They don't randomize every time you visit the store. So that's possible. Interestingly, a recent Bain study suggests that something similar may also be possible in the brick-and-mortar setting, where basically, if you have a large chain of retail stores, you could have strategically different assortments in different outlets of your retail stores. That would be, again, a form of randomization. So again, we can implement randomized assortments. We can basically de-randomize them by offering different assortments at different locations. All right. Let me now address the question of when randomization can actually help in robust assortment optimization. And to this end, I'll first define formally what I mean by assortment optimization. To me, the nominal assortment optimization problem is a quadruple NSCR, where N is our universe of products, all the products that we can potentially show to our customers. And sometimes I will make use of the designated product 0, which is the outside option, the customer leaving our store. We then have a set S of admissible or feasible assortments. Those are basically the assortments that we're allowed to show. And mathematically speaking, the set S is a subset of the power set of N, the set of all subsets of N. We call an assortment optimization problem unconstrained if S is exactly the power set of N. And otherwise, we call the assortment problem constrained. In particular, in my talk here, we will be interested in cardinality constraint assortments, where we say, well, we can choose any assortment that has at most K products, where K is some number smaller than N. We then have the choice model C that specifies the customer behavior. The choice model is a mapping from the set of admissible assortments to probability vectors. The idea here is if you evaluate C given S for some assortment, then Ci given S is going to be the probability that a customer chooses product I if we show the assortment S, where I is going to be part of the assortment. So that's the choice model in very abstract generic terms for now. And then finally, we have the vector R of product prices if we want to maximize expected revenues. R could also be the product profits if we want to maximize the expected profits. And then the nominal assortment optimization problem chooses an assortment S from the set of admissible assortments that maximize the expected profits, where the expectation is taken. Sorry, I'm not sure whether you can see that. It's currently overlaid on my screen, where the expectation is taken with respect to the choice model. So here, this expression here is the probability that a customer purchases product I if we show assortment S times the price of product I. And we sum this up over all products in our current assortment. Now, let's look at a robust assortment optimization problem. In a robust assortment optimization problem, we additionally have an uncertainty set U. And now we have a potentially different choice model for each realization of the uncertain parameter vector U that is contained in the set U. And the goal now is, as I mentioned before, to play a Stackelberg leader-follower game where we as a decision maker choose the admissible assortment that maximizes the worst case expected revenues. Here, the worst case is taken over the parameter vectors in our uncertainty set, and the expectation is taken again with respect to the uncertain customer choice. And new in this talk, we're also interested in the randomized robust assortment optimization problem, where we do not just pick deterministically a single assortment, but where we assign a probability to each and every admissible assortment. And then we're trying to maximize worst case expected revenues, where the worst case is again taken over the possible parameter vectors in our uncertainty set, and where the expectation is now an iterated expectation. The outer expectation is taken with respect to our randomization strategy, and the inner expectation is the expected revenues due to the uncertainty in the customer choice. And we will call an instance of the assortment optimization problem randomization proof if the optimal value of the randomized assortment optimization problem coincides with that of the deterministic assortment or robust assortment optimization problem. And we call an instance randomization receptive otherwise, if we can actually make extra expected revenues, worst case expected revenues by randomizing over assortments. Okay, let's now try to understand when randomization can help. And I will try to address this question from two angles. The first one is by looking at random instances of the robust assortment optimization problem. And the second one will be by looking at particular choice models that are popular in practice. So let's first have a look at the first perspective. What I'm looking at here is you can think of this as a random instance generator for robust assortment optimization problems. And what this random instance generator does is it fixes a product universe. So the products are fixed. It fixes the set of admissible assortments. It fixes an uncertainty set, and it fixes the product prices. The only thing that is uncertain is our choice model. And that is in line with the idea that we suffer estimation errors from estimating the choice model. All right, here's what I assume. I generate the choice model as follows. I generate the choice model, uncertainty realization by uncertainty realization, and assortment by assortment. So let's fix an uncertainty realization U and an assortment S. Then I pick the probability vector that correspond to the customer choices randomly from some probability distribution that may depend on the assortment S. And I don't make any assumptions of that about that probability distribution PS, other than that it has full support. What I mean by that is that any vector of choice probabilities within the probability simplex over S is principally possible. And the only other assumption that I make is that there are sufficiently many assortments that contain a highest price product. Under those assumptions, one can show that the robust assortment optimization problem is randomization receptive with probability going to 1 when either the number of admissible assortments grows large or the number of uncertainty realizations grows large. So in other words, what this result is telling us is if we were to randomly generate assortment optimization instances and we look at larger problems, then they become randomization receptive with probability going to 1. So it's much more likely to see randomization receptive instances of the robust assortment optimization problem than randomization proof ones under this instance generation procedure. Okay. In reality, however, the choice models are not picked randomly. There are a few major popular choice models, and I want to study briefly 3 of them, namely the multinomial logit model, the Markov chain model, and the preference ranking model. So let's start with the multinomial logit model. That's probably the single most popular choice model in assortment optimization, both in theory as well as in industrial practice. And the idea is very simple. Imagine our product universe comprises of those 4 pairs of shoes. Then the multinomial logit model essentially assigns a value vi to each product I. And if we were to show our customers an assortment S, then the probability that a customer chooses product I from within this assortment is simply the value of I divided by the cumulative product values in that assortment plus the value of the outside option. So in other words, the more valuable a product is to our customers, the more likely they are to buy it. That's what the multinomial logit model assumes. And since we're interested in a robust assortment optimization problem here, we will assume that those values vi are uncertain and they live in some uncertainty set. So under this multinomial logit model, can randomization help? It turns out that this depends on whether we consider an unconstrained assortment optimization problem or a cardinality constrained assortment optimization problem. Under the unconstrained robust optimization problem, one can show that if we assume a multinomial logit model, randomization cannot help. Whereas if we have cardinality constraint, it turns out that the benefits of randomized strategies are potentially unbounded. There is no upper bound on the benefits that we can enjoy if we go from a deterministic to a randomized robust strategy. There is a flip side to that, and that is that we can generate instances of the robust assortment optimization problem under a multinomial logit choice model, where all optimal randomized strategies have to randomize between exponentially many assortments. So the randomization strategy can be complicated. Of course, this doesn't mean that simpler randomization strategies will still improve significantly. Okay, let's have a look at the second choice model. This is also, it's a much younger choice model, but it's very popular in academic research at the moment. It's called the Markov chain model. And the idea is the following. Imagine this is again our universe of products together with an outside option. Then the idea is if a customer comes in, she has a preferred product. And the probability that this preferred product is product I, let's say those brown shoes, is given by lambda I. Now, if we offer these brown shoes as part of our assortment, the customer buys those shoes and leaves the store. On the other hand, if we don't offer the brown shoes as part of our assortment, then the customer randomly transitions to a new favorite product. And the process repeats itself in Markovian fashion as if the customer always wanted that other product as the most preferred product. So this is the non-robust Markov chain choice model. Under our robust angle, we can either assume that we have an uncertainty set for each row of this transition kernel. This is what has been looked at in the literature so far. But we can also look at a single uncertainty set for the entire transition kernel, which I would argue is perhaps the more attractive case when it comes to statistical estimation. Okay. Let's look at our robust assortment optimization problem under this Markov chain choice model. It turns out here that we have to distinguish between product-wise substitution sets and those general substitution sets. If we don't have any cardinality constraints on our assortment, then it turns out randomization cannot help under product-wise substitution sets, but they do help, randomization does help under the general substitution sets. However, the benefit here is bounded. It's bounded by the ratio of the largest to the smallest product price in our universe of products. On the other hand, if we look at a cardinality constraint assortment optimization problem, then it turns out that the benefits are indeed, again, unbounded, both for the case of product-wise and general substitution sets. We again end up in a similar situation with respect to the complexity of optimal randomized strategies. We can again, for the Markov chain model, come up with nasty problem instances where all optimal randomization strategies randomize between exponentially many assortments. All right, let's have a quick look at our third and last choice model, which is the preference ranking model. The idea here is that we cluster our set of customers into k different customer types, and each customer type has a preference ranking. So here's one preference ranking, here's another preference ranking. The probability that a customer has a preference ranking k is given by lambda k. Now let's assume a customer comes in with preference ranking k equals 1. Then this preference ranking tells us that the customer is most interested in those white shoes. So if they are part of our assortment, the customer will buy the white shoes and leave our store. Otherwise, she will try to buy the brown shoes if they are available. And in this particular case, if the brown shoes are not available either, the customer will leave our store and exercise her outside option. Now, if we, and again, if we look at a robust preference ranking model, what we do is we assume that those probabilities here are uncertain and they are part of an uncertainty set. Now, under the preference ranking model, it turns out that, again, randomization can help already in the unconstrained problem setting. However, again, those benefits are bounded by the ratio of the largest to the smallest product price. Whereas in the unconstrained, whereas in the cardinality constraint problem formulation, the potential benefits from randomization are again unbounded. Contrary to the previous few choice models, under the preference ranking, there's always going to be an optimal randomization strategy that is parsimonious. If we have k different customer types in the preference ranking, then there is always an optimal randomization strategy that randomizes between at most k+1 assortments. All right. So this addresses the question when randomization helps in sample in the robust problem formulation. Now, let me briefly tell you how we compute randomized assortments. And basically, this reduces to the solution of a single-stage robust optimization problem, but a single-stage robust optimization problem with two, let's say, extra challenges. The first one is that we have a lot of decision variables here. We have exponentially many decision variables in the number of products, because the number of feasible assortments is typically exponential in the number of products. And the second challenge is that the objective function is typically not benign. What I mean by that, it's typically non-convex and requires either the solution of some fixed point equation or the solution of a mixed integer linear program. So we will address both of these challenges simultaneously by adapting a procedure that has been proposed by Delage and Seif. And that will be an iterative primal dual solution approach. Since it's a primal dual solution method, I will first show you the strong dual to our randomized assortment optimization problem, and then I will briefly show you how the algorithm works. So remember, this is our randomized assortment optimization problem from the previous slide. And I want to solve a sequence of restricted primal problems, but I also want to simultaneously solve a sequence of restricted dual problems. So I need a strong dual to this problem. And the way I can do that is the following. Since R as U is typically non-convex in U, I cannot easily use a min-max theorem here. But what I can do is I can enlarge nature's choice by allowing nature to not just choose the worst parameter setting, but by allowing nature to choose the worst convex combination of parameter settings. This is a larger search space, but it actually leads to exactly the same worst case outcome. Now, however, I'm going to have a bilinear problem in my variables in my randomization strategy PS that I maximize over, as well as nature's convex combinations, convexity weights over the uncertain parameter realizations. So since this problem is bilinear, I can now use a min-max theorem to exchange the order of maximum and minimum. And then I can observe that now, since we're the second player, we no longer need to randomize over our assortment optimization strategy, because actually being inside, moving second after nature, we observe the parameter settings or the convex combination of parameter settings. So we might as well choose an assortment deterministically. And this gives us the dual problem that is written here. And in some sense, this exhibits a quite nice symmetry if we think about it. In the primal problem, we randomize over assortment strategies and nature chooses the worst parameter setting. Whereas in the dual problem, you can think of nature randomizing across parameter settings, and we respond with the best possible for us assortment. Okay, so unfortunately, both the primal and the dual problem are challenging to solve. But what we can do is we can solve restrictions of the primal problem where we only look at a few assortments. And we can solve restrictions of the dual problem where we only look at a few uncertain parameter realizations. And we do that. Each restriction of the primal problem gives us a lower bound on the optimal value, and each restriction of the dual problem gives us an upper bound on the optimal value. And we keep refining those restrictions until they converge to the same value. And it turns out that if you choose the right strategy to update this set you had here of restricted parameter realizations, set S hat of assortments that we randomize over, if you do that in a particular way, then you can get indeed finite convergence of both problems to the optimal value. So that's what we do to compute optimal assortments, but still, whenever we have one iteration of our primal dual solution approach, we have to solve this problem here, which is in itself not entirely easy to solve. The way we solve this is through a cutting plane approach. The reason for that is that the objective function here tends to be non-convex in U, so there's no easy way to solve this directly using the robust optimization trick. So what we do instead is we start with some lower and upper bounds on the problem, and then we iterate between evaluating the worst case here for a fixed P, which is a non-convex problem, but it's typically an MILP, so it can be done reasonably efficiently. This gives us a new uncertainty realization to add to the dual problem. And then we solve a double restricted primal problem where we now optimize over our assortments S hat, the restricted assortments, and we only account for the parameter values U that we have gathered so far. This problem is just a linear program, so this can be solved very easily. The reason being that we have finitely many parameter realizations U here. All right. In our paper, we have done a number of tests. We have done various synthetic tests. We have also applied our randomization strategies to a real-life test instance from the literature. But what I would really like to focus on here is a particular data-driven experiment that we have done. And this experiment runs as follows. We created random instances of the assortment optimization problem under a multinomial logit model with 10 products. So in other words, we took random parameter values for the multinomial logit model, and then we generated a training set that consisted of random assortments that we showed to our customers and the product that the customer picked back then under the unknown true choice model. So that's our training set. It's comparable to what one would have in practice. And what we did then is we completely forgot about the true MNL model that generated the data. And instead, we re-estimated the parameters using maximum likelihood estimation, because that's what you would do in reality. If you don't know the parameters, you would typically use an MLE for that. This then fed into a nominal assortment optimization problem to get the optimal nominal assortment for the MLE estimate. What we also did is we constructed a deterministic and randomized robust assortment. And the way we did that is we used a simple budget uncertainty set that whose size we tuned via cross-validation. So there was no kind of parameter snooping. Everything was done, the optimization as well as the adjustment of the hyperparameter was done on the training data only. That gave us different assortments, and we could then compare the performance of those assortments under the true MNL model against a clairvoyant model that knows exactly the right customer choice model. And we can then record the optimality gaps of those three approaches. And what we have done is we have done that over many problem instances, ranging with different cardinality, a cardinality of 4, 3, 2, 1. That's the number of products that were shown in the assortment in the training data, as well as the number of products that we can show in our assortment that we are supposed to construct. And we have also run experiments for various sizes of training data sets. And here's what we observe. First of all, the most obvious thing to observe is that as we have more training data, the performance of all three approaches improved. The optimality gap with respect to the clairvoyant solution always went down. That's reassuring, and that's of course also expected. The more data we have, the better we can estimate. The second thing to observe is that as the cardinality decreases, so as we go from right to left, the problems become much harder. The optimality gaps become much larger. Because here for cardinality 4, we have an optimality gap of like 2 to 4%, whereas under cardinality 1, we have an optimality gap from 10 to 20%. This is also reasonable if you think about it, because if our training data consists of customer choices, where the customer picked her most favorite product out of assortments of size 4, from each sample, we can learn a lot more than if our training data consists of assortments of size 1. Because in an assortment of size 1, we only learn whether the customer prefers the product to the outside option or not. So problems with small cardinality become much more challenging to solve. Interestingly now is the order of the methods that shows quite clearly here. And that is the deterministic robust problem always outperforms the nominal problem. The nominal problem is here in blue. The deterministic robust problem is in orange. And the randomized robust problem always outperforms the deterministic robust problem. This is not necessarily a priori clear for two reasons. First of all, remember that the robust models have a hyperparameter they need to tune based on the training data. So they need to use the same amount of available data for estimation and parameter tuning. And secondly, we're looking at the out-of-sample objective. So what we're comparing here in terms of optimality gaps are no longer worst-case expected profits, but it's expected profits under the unknown true model. So you can think of this as the generalization error, if you wish. The other thing to observe is that actually implementing randomization can help quite a lot in a data-driven setting. So it can make a difference of up to 3–4%, which in practice is quite a lot in online retail. And randomization helps most in settings with high ambiguity, where we learn little from our data, and where the decisions are risky, where we have to choose assortments that are very small relative to the available products. Okay. This leads me to the end of my talk. So what we have seen here is an observation that has been made in the literature before, and that is that the nominal assortment optimization problem in a data-driven setting is prone to overfitting. And a potential cure here is robust assortment optimization problem. It turns out that in the context of assortment optimization, randomization can help us to further improve on not just the in-sample objective, but also on the out-of-sample objective. More generally, I believe the concept of randomization may be an interesting concept to consider, not just in the context of assortment optimization, but also in the wider context of revenue management. We could think of pricing decisions or product line decisions that can be taken in a randomized fashion. As well as in other areas. Randomization, for example, is quite prevalent in algorithm design. So we could think of the design of optimal randomized algorithms, for example. And with this, I hand back to Yannis and Reza. Thank you very much for your attention.